Well, all right. Can anyone hear me? Do I need to speak into the mic? Are we at good volume here? Okay. So, my presentation is Bitcoin from zero to I get it. That's what I'm hoping to accomplish today, is that people who don't know about Bitcoin or maybe seen it once or twice can go from just a basic understanding they have to understanding all the parts that go into it and being able to intelligently speak on it if anyone were asking about it. I'd like to thank SecureWV for having me here today, for accepting my paper, and the 304 Geeks for hosting it. I've had fun the little bit I was here on Friday to pick up my badge. So we'll get started here. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about Bitcoin. Now, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. It is a currency that uses cryptography to verify the transfer and its transactions. It's digital, and it is hosted on a decentralized database called the blockchain. The blockchain is, can be used for many other things, but it was first introduced with Bitcoin to keep track of the transactions and the transference of Bitcoin from users to each other. So let's start from the beginning. When it comes to some principles about Bitcoin itself, there are 21 million coins themselves, and they are divisible. We'll go over how far they go down here in a second. No censorship. If you have a valid transaction, the idea is if you follow all the rules on the network, your transaction will go through, will be accepted, and you can interact as long as you follow the rules. That would be valid transactions cannot be prevented from being confirmed. Open source. The original Bitcoin implementation has been open source from the beginning. Many other coins have been re-implemented as closed, but then later became open source because they realized when they find a bug, it's better to have more eyes looking at it than fewer. Having something closed source and secure is basically keeping the key underneath the doormat. And that's been something part of Bitcoin from the beginning. Permissionless. No one can just say you're not allowed to use it. No arbitrary gatekeepers. If you can download the software, if you can connect to the internet, and you're not behind a firewall, no one on the network is going to keep someone from using it. As long as you follow the rules, nothing will keep you from doing it. And that kind of goes into how it needs to be pseudonymous. Excuse me. No ID, no verification. If you follow the rules, you can use it. Now, people can block your IP address if you're known to be a malicious user or what have you, but the network protocol suggests that there's no bias towards anybody for any reason at all, that hasn't been at least proven by malicious use or what have you. Fungibility. Every Bitcoin is the same in terms of how it is transmitted on the network. Again, people can choose not to accept it from certain people, but the protocol itself is neutral to all coins and transactions. And irreversible transactions. There are no remittances, there are no chargebacks. If you send Bitcoin to somebody, the way you get it back is by having them send that back. Now, these are some things I want you to keep in mind during the whole presentation, because they'll come up, and you'll see how the design, relates to these and how these sort of, made the Bitcoin network and protocol work. So we have our units here. Each Bitcoin can be reduced down to 1/100 millionth. That's a Satoshi named after the guy who invented it, Satoshi Nakamoto, which isn't his real name, obviously. But of course, if you have, these are what they're referred to as. You have Bitcoins and smaller transactions, and of course, if Bitcoin is at $100, that's how much each piece will be worth. Now, notice how that's a fraction of a cent. That's by design. That way you can have very precise transaction amounts and sending value over the internet. Now, Bitcoin's at about 730, 20, depending on where you look. So adjust it for those, and you'll see how much Bitcoin is in those different denominations. Now, when Bitcoin is sent, it has to have double entry bookkeeping. Who it's sent from and who it's sent to need to be kept track of, because it's secured using cryptography and keys, which I'll show you in a second. And you have the inputs, you have the outputs, and the difference between them is a fee to use the network. That way, everyone who runs it, everyone who mines, everyone who interacts with the network has a reason to send to transmit your transaction. So the inputs and the outputs, the difference is the transaction fee, which will go to, we have our common transaction where someone has some coins and they send it to somebody. But if you'll notice, when someone has inputs, they are whole numbers there. And when they're sent over, those aren't the same. Those don't line up. It's because each transaction, each piece of Bitcoin is like a denomination. Like you have $100, you break it to send to more addresses, like we have here. Someone wants to send somebody some Bitcoin, they take a transaction they have, and they split it into who it's being sent to, and some change back to themselves. Usually the same address that sent it. Okay? And here's something I want you to look at. We have the transactions, and what we're having on the blockchain is a chain of ownership using public and private keys. So you have the private key to sign over transactions. You have parts of that transaction to the next person, to someone's public key. And I'll go over this again as we learn more about it. So what we're trying to put together here on the blockchain of Bitcoin is they move from person to person. It's the same Bitcoins, and you can have a chain of transactions to show who owns it. Now, let's talk about privacy. In normal banking and financial tools, you have everything sort of goes on the back end, in the background, and the public doesn't know much about it unless they are the owner of an account or annuity or something. Bitcoin's a little bit different because every transaction is out there. It's all out there. Your identity is kept secret using using cryptography and your private key, but all transactions are public. The entire blockchain can be mined, data mined, verified, looked at, and into perpetuity as long as the network's up. So that's part of the openness that you can't block somebody from using it, because anyone can verify. Anyone can say this is legitimate or it's not for transactions. So what we have here, we have some Bitcoin addresses. These are basically the public keys that you give to someone and they send you some money, Bitcoin. And you'll notice they all begin with a 1, they're all about the same length, they're a jumble of letters and numbers. Of course, those are generated using cryptographic functions, and they are encoded into something called base 58. It's a human-readable encoding with a limited alphabet for addresses and sometimes for keys. Yeah, it's the alphabet, the order it's in. It may look familiar to some of you because it's basically base 64 without these here. That way it's human-readable. There's no ambiguity. Give her some special characters. Because sometimes when you copy and paste things, when you click it twice, it'll stop at special characters. So you double-click it when you copy and paste it. It's all alphanumeric, and just about every editor or browser will not stop and cut it off. So now, because everyone can get access to the blockchain and just download it, all 60 gigs of it, ownership of Bitcoin isn't exactly the best way to think about it all the time. Control is a better way to do it, because if you have the private key to an address that holds the Bitcoin, you can control it. Let's see. I'm glad the last person talked about cryptography a little bit, so it's all in your brains here, but we've all seen this. We've all seen public and private keys for your emails and things like that. You have a private key. You runs it through elliptic curve cryptography to become the public key, and there's a little more that gets added to it for it to become the actual Bitcoin address that's valid on the network. Now let's look at this again. We have public keys and private keys that interact with the transactions to sign over value to other people. And the hashes are there to verify it. To verify that this actually happened, it's a combination of these keys. That way, if someone says, this is mine, well, you have to provide the public key and your private key to verify that. So what we're still creating here is signed chains of ownership for Bitcoin. So let's start with an example that's out front so we can all look at how it starts. Let's take a string, any old string, okay? And it becomes a private key for elliptic curve cryptography. And you run it through the functions, and you get your public key. If you are a little more familiar with it, the top part is the X and the Y coordinates of the formula, if you're actually familiar with how elliptic cryptography works. And you run it through another process to go from your public key to the actual Bitcoin address. You run it through SHA-256, RIPMD 160, and it gives you a hash of your public key. And then you do some encoding, and it gives you the actual address. So let's go through those parts. We have our public key, we run it through the hash functions, and we're there with the one on the bottom. Now, how that actually turns into a public key is pretty simple. So if you have that and you want to convert it to base 58 and actually have it be a valid public key, you have to run it through some more here. So you have there's your pay public key. You add the version because there is a test net for Bitcoin. You want to be on the real, actual network. You add some checksums at the end. You encode it, and there you have your actual Bitcoin address. And there's all that. You take some bytes off the end of there, add it to, and encode it, and you have a perfectly valid Bitcoin address. Now, when you have your addresses, you store them in a program called a wallet. You have a set of public keys and private keys in your wallet. And if you use the method I did, except for you use something random, you'll have a bunch of random keys from different public, from different private keys in a wallet. A wallet can be just it can be just a text file on your desktop, or it can be a very sophisticated piece of software, that keeps track of everything. Like this. You can have, instead of just one seed, a string, like the one I put, you can have a seed. The go becomes the key, and you can iterate over it and create more keys. So if you had one phrase, and you can remember a random phrase about 10, 15 words, you can go anywhere in the world that has the internet access, not North Korea basically, and get access to the blockchain and your Bitcoin. If Bitcoin was ever made illegal in a place, China, I'll say it, and someone can remember 10 words, they can put it all somewhere, leave the country, and get access to it. I guess that emphasizes how, ownership isn't the right way to think of it. It's control. So, and there's actually a wallet called Mycelium that does that for you. Your 12-word mnemonic becomes your master key. You have it all there, and it just starts generating them. So really all it holds on to is your master key, and it just runs it through the process each time to give you all your Bitcoin addresses. And of course, who here uses a smart card at work or some kind of hardware-based cryptography? Yeah. So if you had that and you never wrote it anywhere, you put that in your computer, that could be the seed, the certificate, the private certificate on it. And that's what we have here. I do have one of those, actually a Bitcoin wallet that goes through Mycelium and does this. Let's go back to our example here. What's wrong here? What's not good here? What's insecure here? Somebody. I want to answer somebody. Anybody. Dictionary words. Yes. Both dictionary words and, anyone who recognizes that song can know that even the most awful script kiddie dictionary attack could break that and generate that. But if you want to have security like you do with all passwords, you either use something that's cryptographically secure, source of randomness, and because the blockchain can be downloaded by anybody, you don't have to send a query to make sure it's correct. You can just keep running addresses all day, and there's in fact even a website that finds all examples like this that have been put in presentations and books and things and puts them out there to make sure that no one actually tries to use them. So that's how you get your keys, and that's how you get ownership of Bitcoin once it's on the blockchain. Again here, I hope this makes a little more sense now that with your private key and other people's public keys, you send Bitcoin from one person to the next, and as you see, it starts connecting. It's all connected. It's a chain. And actually, if you send it to enough people, it starts looking like a large tree. So we have our transactions, and it goes from person to person. We've got our nice standard names, Alice and Bob. And we have our inputs and outputs. And we look at the common transactions to have change in things, but it can be a little bit different sometimes because the transaction fees on the network are based on how much space you put into a block, how many transactions you use in bytes or kilobytes. So if you have a lot of Bitcoin across a bunch of different addresses, you can create a transaction to put it either all into one to aggregate it or to send it to many people. And that will reduce the amount of data being sent to the blockchain and your transaction fees. So let's look here. We've got a transaction. The output of that first transaction goes to Joe, and then he signs it and it goes to Alice with the implied transaction fee there. And if you see, the transaction, the second one, is the one from the first one, the output from that first one. And it goes to the next person, on to the next person. So each splitting of Bitcoin is part of a transaction. The inputs from one transaction become the outputs for another one, and they keep spreading out unless they're aggregated. And here it is on the actual blockchain. If you use a block explorer, you can see that they are actually here. And you've got your output to those addresses. It can show you the fees, since it's obvious that person sent it from their address to their own address. That's obviously a change transaction. And you can see where the fees are and the estimated Bitcoin transacted here. Now there's one type of transaction that I think really is the key to everyone's understanding when it comes to how Bitcoin is generated. When Bitcoin is generated, it's mined, and people do the work to generate it, they put into the blockchain a transaction to themselves or to whoever. They probably want to put it to themselves so they can get credit for it. But what you have is in every time someone solves a block and adds something to the blockchain, there is a transaction, the very first one, to themselves. That is the reward for actually propping up the network. And if you go back to our transaction fees here, the difference between those transactions is the transaction fee, and that is added to our transaction, which is called the coin-based transaction. So after a while, once Bitcoin, less is being made every 10 minutes, fees for transactions will be the majority of what's being sent. In fact, once no more Bitcoin is being generated, that'll be all that's being generated. So mining isn't dead yet, but I'll let you be the judge as to whether or not you want to jump into it. So we've talked a lot about chaining of transactions and the flow of money from people to one another. And this is what we can think of as the blockchain. You have blocks, they have transactions in them, they have their hashes, they verify them, and they point to each other. Now, in there you see something called proof of work. Now that's an algorithm I'm going to describe here in a second that basically it tells everyone, I've done the work, I'm worthy of that 50 Bitcoin for doing this. But let's look at these blocks to start with. They have some details in them, and the size and the bytes there. You have the size of the blocks, the header, the transactions that are contained within them. And you have the header itself, which has a lot of pertinent information. And this is very important when it comes to mining. You have the version, the previous block hash that points back to it. The Merkle root, which is basically a cryptographic, it's a tree of all the transactions. The timestamp, pretty obvious. And two things at the bottom, the difficulty target and the nonce. I'll explain those in a second, but those have to deal with the actual hashing itself, when you actually run the miners and try to solve the block. So, we have the blockchain header fields, and we go through our equation down here. You concatenate them together, and you run a hash of it. SHA-256, you run it twice against the header itself. And that gives you the hash of the block itself. Now, the difficulty target, I'll go over, but the nonce is basically a random number that you throw in there. Because if you hash a block once with all the details in it, you have to change something about it. Otherwise, you'll get the same hash over and over and over and over. So let's see here. We have every 2 weeks, the difficulty is changed to show, we want to have 10 minutes per block based on the last 2 weeks. So here it is. Retargeting is set to make it on the past 2,016 blocks, which is roughly 2 weeks. Let's go back to our nonce here. So the block hash has to be under a certain amount for other miners and network to accept. Let's say we want the hash, 256-bit hash. It has to be underneath this right here. Otherwise, it's no good. A lot of leading zeros there, a lot of trailing zeros. Now, mind you, this is hexadecimal, so each time you move to the right, that's an exponential, change in difficulty, which the hashing on the network has gone up exponentially over the years. So let's see. We add our nonce, just a random number to the end of it, and it's not under the difficulty. Well, you just generate a new nonce. You just keep doing this over and over again. You concatenate it, you hash it again, and you repeat until the difficulty target is met. Everything you've heard about hashing, you could write it in Visual Basic if you wanted, or what's a language no one likes? You can write it in that. You really can. You keep doing that, you generate it, until you have something underneath the difficulty target. Now, mining has gone from graphics cards to specific circuits for ASICs for Bitcoin mining. And Bitcoin uses SHA-256, but there are a lot of other coins out there that use everything the same as Bitcoin, except for maybe they have a different block time, they have different amounts. But the biggest difference between a lot of coins is they use different hashing algorithms. There's SHA-256 twice. Some of it do it just one time. Some of it use scrypt. If you know about Linux and passwords, they have that. Whirlpool, SHA-3. There's even one coin that uses, instead of taking a hash of SHA-256, you first take a 256, and you take a hash, a script hash of that, and then a Whirlpool hash of that, and the SHA-3 hash of that. So a long chain of hashes. That way, no one can create an integrated circuit for it. Now, if that ever becomes ineffective, consensus can change that as long as everyone agrees on it. And some coins have switched their algorithms. So, you run through it, you go underneath the difficulty target until the target is met. And then you send it out to the network. So here we are. Good old block P. It's out there, it's verified, everyone agrees on it, chain's extended, we just keep going. But that doesn't always happen as smoothly as it does. Sometimes two people at the exact same time, roughly, because it's an average of 10 minutes, will generate the same block, or a candidate block that extends the chain. So let's say that happens. Honest mistake, it happens plenty of times. The red network finds something that extends the blockchain, and the green network does too. And because of network latency, it takes a little bit for them to go out there. Blocks are about a megabyte, so it's fast, but it's not instantaneous. So it propagates out, and what you'll have is two halves of the network competing for the same block, mining it. As they'll generate a new block that's based on that one, and it'll propagate throughout the network. So you'll have half doing one, half doing the other. So we have block A and block B. Half of the network is hashing each one of those because it was sent to them first. So what happens next? They're hashing, and someone finds a new block that extends the blockchain. But which one? Extends the green over there is extended by the magenta, and it propagates out to the network, and everyone gets a hold of it, and then they look at it. After they look at it, they say, well, either it extends our chain that we're working on, it'll extend some other chain, and they'll probably resync with that network, and things just kind of go on as they are. And that's not really a problem in most cases, because the whole network's talking to the whole network, and consensus is what it's all built on. So let's talk about what happens when that does happen. It's in the interest of every honest miner to take the longest blockchain, because if not, they're going to have to come from behind, which I'll talk about that in a second. Or, all the transactions that they were in an orphan block, were probably transmitted to the longer chain anyway. And if after 3 or 4 blocks have been transmitted, all the ones that were invalidated by them getting rid of that block have already propagated to the network, and everything's just fine. Now, since transactions are signed and sent to anyone, so if you put on Wikipedia, if you edited a page and threw some random gobbledygook in there, someone knew what to do with it. They could pull it down and decrypt it. And you can think of it like that with transactions. So if someone has a transaction broadcast, as long as someone holds on to it, the hash of that transaction contains the signing over of it. So as long as it's out there somewhere, someone will add it into a block. And any good wallet software or servicer of it will make sure your transaction gets in there at some point. It may not happen the next block, but within 2 or 3, there are some equations to make sure that older transactions, once they're transmitted, find their way into the blockchain. So, rejecting the longest chain invalidates any possible gains from mining. We'll say if you have a different chain that's 3 or 4 blocks ahead and you're a miner, you just want to choose it. Or does it? Because I'm sure everyone's heard when they've read about Bitcoin that there can be an attack on the network. The dreaded 51% attack. Now, if you have a dishonest chain, an attacker, or just an honest, someone who has a shorter chain, we can look at the math behind this. So let's say we have the probability that an honest node finds the next block, and the probability the attacker finds the next block. Now, that is quite literally a split between how much hashing power one side has and the other one has. So let's say it's around 45-55. So let's see here. The probability attacker will ever catch up. If the attacking chain has more, there's a chance that after however many blocks, at some point in the future, they will catch up. They could rehash the entire chain if they wanted to and catch up. It will take a long time, but they will catch up eventually. But let's say we have an attacking chain that has less than half of the attack power. Well, each block has a probability of being solved. Q over P. And if it's 45-50, that's close to 1. So if you're only 1 block behind, there's a chance you could catch up. But each time you go back, you have to multiply that by itself. So if your chance of actually getting the block out of that equation is 90%, well, 2 blocks back, that's 0.9 times 0.9, 3 back, and it keeps going and going and going. And if you're far enough back, your chance of actually catching up are next to none. Unless that's the whole point. Unless you really do want to go and you've decided that that's what you're trying to do in life. We have a fork that isn't just a 1 or 2 chain. Some wants to go back about 10 blocks and try and rehash some blocks to invalidate the transactions of blocks 2 through 9 on the top chain. So they have to start at the point they want, and they start hashing a block that is a candidate block that points back to that one. Well, something interesting happens. If they are both 50-50, which is close enough to 51 for our purposes, and they both generate the block. Now, since they have half the hashing power of each side, the difficulty didn't change. So it takes 20 minutes for each block. And then 20 minutes later, there they are. And it just keeps going and going. So unless you have enough hashing power to not only extend the block to there before they do, and you're a miner who has 50% of the network, and you want to say, I don't care about the top blocks. If you have 50% of the network, those top blocks there's probably a lot of your money in there from just the mining. So the chance that someone would actually do this in an attempt to be greedy and pull, resources to them, there's a lot of game theory in there that suggests they would not want to do that. Because if you're a miner who has 50% of the network or a significant amount, you're getting so many blocks, you're getting the rewards. Someone would only want to do this if they're actually trying to attack the network, like a legitimate attack to break it down and not to steal or reverse transactions. So anyone who would do that, they have IP addresses, they have names, they have addresses, they have identifiers that says anything sent from them, I don't want it. And the pace of the internet is if something happens, everyone knows about it in 2 or 3 minutes. At least if you're watching closely and see this happening, there's a lot of alerts in place. So if you were to see this happening, there's a lot of automated steps within mining software that says, I'm just not going to talk to those people. We're not going to do it. The forums will blow up, Twitter will blow up, all hands on deck to make sure this doesn't happen. So, I want to go back to this right here. Rejecting the longest chain invalidates any possible gains from mining. Or does it? Well, yes it does. But if your point is not to take the money and run, or to be greedy on the network, if your point is actually attack it, well, yes. If your point is to invalidate the blocks, that's a beautiful way to do it. If you hate Bitcoin that much, and you want to drop, $150 million on the software and hardware and all the things that go into it in the data centers to break down the network, well, what they can just do is the next couple blocks, they can just switch to a different algorithm and all your dreams just got destroyed. So Bitcoin is very robust, not because of the underlying software and cryptography as much as it is also with the people who use it. So honest miners who want to make sure this system goes into perpetuity, that transactions are sent, everything is done, and valid and honest and good enough intention, the blockchain will just keep going and going. It doesn't need anybody or anything to keep going. So, this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about Bitcoin. It's a decentralized cryptocurrency built on the blockchain. And the blockchain is a decentralized database used to securely and immutably send information. In the case of Bitcoin, that is financial value. I always get asked, what is the value of Bitcoin? Well, what's the value of any other dollars, gold, silver, stocks? Who here does not have a bank account? Like, at all. No checking, no savings, nothing. Right. Who here does? I want all the hands up. So, the fact that you can just put your money into a bank and they are bound by law to treat it nicely, and you equitably, is not something nice about the banking system now. I'd say that contributes a lot to the value of the dollar. Let's say you're in a place that, we can complain about 2-3% inflation. I know I do. What about a place where it's 10 to 15? Is cash all of a sudden great there? Not so much. So it's what's behind a currency. The network, once you do something, it cannot be invalidated. It can't be charged back. Unless someone actually goes into your house and breaks down and steals your computer, online fraud is really at a certain rate due to negligence or people not having good security practices. Same thing with Bitcoin. Bad passwords, bad hashes, insecure hashes are what become stolen Bitcoin. People like to think of it as a get-rich-quick scheme sometimes. Now, if you're a day trader and you went into day trading Bitcoin, I'd say you probably do pretty well. But if you're not a day trader, you're not going to become a day trader in Bitcoin. If you bought some a while back in the day when it was at however much, and then you sold it off, and you didn't stay in the system, well, that's kind of your fault. There's one transaction out there, the most infamous transaction there is. It's called the Bitcoin pizza transaction. Someone spent 10,000 Bitcoins on 2 pizzas. Now, price at 700 today. It was at 1,000 about a year and a half ago, or maybe about 2 years ago. Was that guy unintelligent or not wise to spend 10,000 Bitcoins on a pizza? Well, no, because he sent them out there when Bitcoin had no value. So he sent nothing to somebody. And he didn't stop mining, and I think that guy is probably, I've looked at the address associated with it, and he's got plenty sitting back right now. So, I hope you've all at least understand the reason why it works. There's a lot of nice, well thought out cryptographic things in Bitcoin that we all trust in our daily lives, since we're mostly security people, or at least computing people. There's a lot of nice networking things. I hope we all trust enough because we're all computing people and networking people. And there's a lot of risk right now, maybe, if you want to invest. But in terms of buying some and sending it to somebody, the transaction fees are almost negligible. If you have a small business that, let's say you go to 7-Eleven, most things are $1 anyway. The reason why they're $1 is because they factor in your credit card purchase into it. So you think of pricing in terms of economics. Well, transaction fees are very low and anyone can use it. You might see, if more people adopted Bitcoin, a lot less money sent to Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and a lot more just savings being passed on to people. I'm sure there's a lot of questions about Bitcoin that, depending on the conference you go to, you'll have. But I'd like to go ahead and open it up to questions. And if there isn't any, there are a few more things I can talk about that I've had good questions about. I'll share with you. Any questions about Bitcoin, the network, people who use it, its value? Why I decided to present here and not somewhere else? Okay, well, who here has a cell phone? Who here had a landline at some point growing up? Rotary dial? By choice or because it's all there was? Okay, all right. Who had to call the operator every time? Okay, nobody's that far. In some parts of the world, some of the third world, in South America, they never really had landlines the same way all of us did. They never had the rotary dial. And they definitely never had operators in every place. Yes, there's a lot of different countries there, but the adoption of cell phones is very high. Just as high as anywhere else. But because the technology of the older things was not so available, planned out, built into the infrastructure, they don't have the. I don't imagine DSL is a big option. Some places never had landlines, but cell phones are. And who knows what a SIM card is? Okay, who knows what function it provides? It's a certificate. It's a smart card. It looks like anything else. So let's say you were in some place that doesn't really have the internet, but has cell phone towers. Places you hear about where cell phone minutes are traded around like currency. let's say instead of having, Bitcoin on the internet, you could have Bitcoin attached to a phone that has a SIM card or some other kind of certificate-based cryptographic hardware. That could be a way to bring banking to people who don't have it. Now, some places have inflation, crazy inflation. It's not so crazy. So is Bitcoin really made for people like us who have cell phones and bank accounts and all the sort of financial tools to, get through what we need to accumulate capital, to finance things? People in other places, not so much. So that is one application I think Bitcoin could fill, is places where there's least cell phones and a copy and paste. The rest just works itself out in terms of being able to transmit Bitcoin. Places that don't have cell phones, that's becoming less and less each day, each month or year probably. Places that don't have actual bank accounts, much larger. So what will we see in some of these places? We'll see places that do not have brick and mortar banks, maybe have online banking, but could possibly, because of cell phone infrastructure and other technology, definitely have a financial system that is digital, secure, and out of the hands of less than savory government officials. So there's one thing I think is real great about Bitcoin in that regard. Now, when it comes to using Bitcoin online, you can get it a lot of ways. You can link up your bank account. You can find a dealer on the street. There's sites for that, local Bitcoins and other places. And you can get it. And you can buy just about anything with it at a certain rate through enough hoops. Like you can buy, vendors like Newegg will let you buy things from it. I know Overstock was big into it. I think Microsoft lets you buy Xbox Live Time or digital games with it. But then there's the next tier of people, a lot of places to take gift cards. You can buy a gift card for a place with Bitcoin, and they will give you a little discount because they don't have to eat the transaction fees for credit cards. Get a little discount, and you can go buy anything. Walmart was finally added to gift, so you can buy anything now with Bitcoin because you can shop at Walmart with it. You can actually get Sheetz gift cards with it, which is nice for this area because all the other places weren't around here. And one thing you can do, and this is something I guess I'll extend to whoever's here, people in other countries who have good, solid, honest, charitable efforts, but they may not be exactly, simple to send them an ACH transaction or a wire or a check. But they're doing good things, like if they're in some place in Africa or Asia or South America, and they're doing well because you've kept up with them, and you want to give them some money to do work, but you don't want to deal with the transaction fees of international wire transfers and clearing houses, and maybe they're in some country that their currency isn't exactly that great. Well, I'd say a lot of charitable efforts in the U.S. and abroad could benefit from having something as seamless and easy to use as Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency that might be more suited to their needs. So I guess with that, if there's anybody here, I saw the Hackers for Charity out there, or 3 or 4 Geeks, if they are interested in getting Bitcoins as payments or things, come see me afterwards. I'll see what I can do to get you in there. If there are any businesses here who sell things that are on the smaller end, hosting, cloud, time, small services or items, I can get you a star on that also. I'll charge the friends and family discount, which is free. I just ask you to use my affiliate links, which actually, because of the nature of Bitcoin, everyone wants to get everybody into it. Most affiliate links both give the person who gets roped in and the roper a discount. Not discount, but a little thing back. So if you get signed up on Coinbase and buy $100 worth of Bitcoin, I get $10, and you get $10 also. So if you're going to get into Bitcoin, try to find somebody who's already got something so you can both benefit from it. I guess there's one more thing for the holidays. There's a website called Gift that sells gift cards. But there's also another website called Purse. Who here has anything on their Amazon wish list? Somebody, anybody? Well, you create an Amazon wish list. You make it public. You send it to sort of the marketplace on Purse. And someone buys those things for you with Bitcoin, which is nice. It's a way for them to buy Bitcoin through a trusted, Amazon's trustworthy, either with the gift cards or their credit card, a very trustworthy source Amazon is. But you can specify a discount. I got this phone. Moto G3 was $200. I got it for about $150 because I just had some Bitcoin sitting around and someone wanted it more than I did. And I got the phone off my wish list. If they don't know my name because they just saw my wish list, and it gets sent to me, and it works out just fine. So the applications of Bitcoin are financial is a good start, but there's one that gets mentioned a couple of times where, let's say you had a very important document, a contract, and let's go all the way back to let's say instead of having a contract, not a contract, but just a random string for our private key, you took instead the hash of a contract, and you made it your private key, and then you just transacted with it on the network. And let's say later on you wanted to prove the authenticity of that document, that it was signed at that time, it exists, it's legitimate. Produce the hash of it and say, hey, on the blockchain, there is an address whose private key is the hash of this contract. That hash is not reproducible. No one else is going to generate that. So is that not a way to use the blockchain for other things? How much does a notary cost? $5 in this state is the most they could charge. How many transactions can you put in a block? It gets pretty high, but let's say you can only put 50 in there. That makes the block itself, not even the currency involved, just the block itself, worth $250 because it can sign and verify 250 documents as a notary. Now let's say instead of having a currency platform that you dump your stuff into so someone else has to hold on to it, let's say there's a blockchain based around being a notary or a legal arbiter or something that needs to be held on to and immutable and unchangeable. The blockchain could be part of that. I know IBM at a conference, I know they had probably the coolest thing I've seen in terms of having a blockchain for an application. It was just a demo. They had 2 screens, or maybe a couple more than 2 screens. They had, they worked with, I think it was either Nike or it was Samsung. Had 2 Samsung ads rolling on the TVs. And what happened was, they put so much money into an address, they signed it with a certain key, and of course this was a different platform, but same concept. They did enough things on the blockchain, and then after about 5 minutes, the ad on the second TV changed. Because what they had on the blockchain was a bidding war for ad space on a TV. Now this is just proof of concept. What if you had a lot of smart billboards? They're coming up there. I see them up and down 64 and 60 these days. What if you had a smart billboard that just read the blockchain? Read, 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 read. And once a transaction goes through, in that transaction it says, go here, get this file, make sure it has this hash, put it on this screen. All you have to do is make sure someone's run only 30 seconds, doesn't have adult content or what have you in it. You can have a completely automated advertising system. Who has ever been to Las Vegas? No DEF CON people? So in Las Vegas, a lot of billboards. I could see that being an application. So, I guess now that I've teased out all the cool stuff, are there any more questions, any comments, any concerns, any remarks?
Do you have any experience with mining?
Yes, I do. Well, I got into it it was after it came down from 1,000, but before it recovered. So a very bad time for anyone who isn't big into it. Some places stopped mining because the electricity costs could not cover the possible reward. I had it in my basement, not my mom's, my basement. I had it on a Raspberry Pi. In fact, let me see if I can pull up a picture here of something that about looked like. And I did have it running on, let's see here. Let's close this out here. Right here.
Oh, okay. You got the little USB ones.
Yes, yep. These USB sticks here have a an application-specific integrated circuit, an ASIC, and what it does one thing very well. SHA-256, not even twice. It just SHA-256, send it back, do it again. Does it work? No. Try the next one. So, people actually, when those came out, those were just all the rage. And then 6 months later, they're...
I bought one too. So.
Yeah. And you can actually, the turnaround time for hardware there for a while was 3 months, theoretically. No one ever had that much turnaround time, but if you based on how the network was working, most hardware was priced to turn around in 3 months and make your money back on it. And I did. I did on mine. Now, most of that was coming back from selling it, but I did. And I would never get back into mining because I don't have a data center at my disposal. No, the one at work won't let me do it there. It's a federal data center. They get you for that. But yes, I've done mining. Most people who do graphics cards mining, there's a lot of that still going on in different coins that don't use SHA-256. There's even a couple coins that require so much memory to do a hash that they do not use graphics cards. They have to use an actual standard CPU because no graphics card has the right amount of memory or the right registers or something for it. So there's a lot of innovation in that space, and I'll leave you with this. There's even some coins out there that verify storage. You can have cloud-based decentralized storage on the blockchain that you just pay for. And there's even a coin that's trying really hard to have a mining algorithm that deals with RAM and its speed. I imagine they're not going to want to buy a mainframe because that's where that would take off. But any innovation that could, if you can dream it up and you can code it, you can do it. Because there's at least some financial incentive to get you started. Now, there's been a lot of scams in the crypto world. We'll just bring this one out over here. Nobody else can laugh at that? Come on now.
Nice.
For anyone who doesn't know, sudo, you can do anything you want with sudo. RM, that's remove. R, that's recursive. That's starting from the very root of your file system. The base of your C drive, the base of your root. Recursively remove and force it. Just do it. I don't care what's there. I don't care if the computer shuts down while I'm doing it, because it will. Just do it. So yes, there's been a lot of scams, but it's mostly stuff like this. It really is. So if you were a naysayer about Bitcoin because of volatility, you're right. You really are. You don't want to invest in it unless you know what you're doing. But if you're a naysayer because you don't trust cryptography or networking, find a different industry. But if you just want to be a casual user who just wants a little discount here and there, just go get some and just use it. I'll ask one more time. Are there any more questions? Well, I would like to thank Secure West Virginia for having me, the 3 or 4 Geeks for putting this on. Anyone who wants to get Bitcoin integrated into their business, if you came to this event, I'll get you sorted in there for free. I'd probably get you sorted in there for free anyway, because actually it's very, very easy to do. I don't actually do anything. I just send you to a website, and you do the rest. But yes, thank you for attending me, and thank you for listening.